Alright, welcome everyone to this next video. In this lesson, we will look at how you can identify all egress connections from workloads in your cluster. Okay, so egress connections are connections your workloads or pods in the cluster initiate towards services outside the cluster. Now, these services could be internal services inside your environment, or these services could be external services in the internet or public services in the internet. Okay. Now, you may want to identify all the services your workloads are communicating with, for example, to build DNS policies. Okay, so let's say you're building security policies for workloads in your cluster and you are interested in allow listing external services your workloads may be communicating with. Now, in such cases, you could either go to your development teams and ask for the services that should be allowed. It could also be the case where you want to confirm or validate the services the workloads are communicating with in a live runtime environment. Okay. Now, once you've identified the services, you may also be interested in identifying the service ports that the workloads are using to communicate with these FQDNs or external services. So service ports, for example, they could be HTTPS port 443. It could also be maybe database ports, maybe even an FTP server, right? If your workloads are communicating with one. Now, you can then use these service ports to configure fine-grained policies with FQDNs plus service port combinations. Okay. And in certain cases, you may also be interested in identifying the service FQDN to IP address translations. This could be useful in certain troubleshooting scenarios. Okay. Alright, so before we go to the dashboard and have a look at the flow logs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exec into a workload, a pod in my cluster, and I'm going to initiate some traffic to external services, a random list of FQDNs from that pod. Okay, and once we've done that, let's go to the dashboard and look at whether we can identify the FQDNs to which connections were initiated. Okay, so in this cluster, I have a pod in a namespace called app4. Okay, now I have exec into this pod and I have a script that I'm gonna run to initiate some traffic to some egress FQDNs, and the script is called curl script.sh. So I'm running the script right now, and that's connecting to a few services out there in the internet. Okay, so now I'm in the dashboard. Before we go through the logs in the dashboard, let's quickly hop into the service graph. Now, in the service graph, if I expand on the app4 namespace, I can see that the namespace, or rather the workload inside the namespace, this particular replica set has initiated connections to the public network. Obviously, I can click on the arrow and expand on flow logs to look at individual flows and identify the destination domains to which those flows were initiated. Okay, but let's say you're interested in getting all the unique domains to which connections were initiated. Okay, so for that, I'm going to go into the flow log dashboard. So in the dashboard, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the app4 source namespace. Okay, so in the source namespaces widget, I can look for the app4 source namespace and apply a filter. That way I have logs from the app4 namespace. Now, I could have also written a query for that, so I could say source underscore namespace and select the app4. So just give me 1 sec, source namespace, and select the app4 namespace. In both cases, it will give you the same result. Now, once you've applied the filter, if you go further down, there is a widget here called unique domains, and it lists all the unique domains to which connections were initiated in the past 15 minutes or so. Okay, so these are the domains to which connections were successfully initiated from the app4 namespace, or rather the workload, this particular workload here in the app4 namespace. Okay, now if you want to, you could download this into a CSV, for example, and use this information, for example, let's say in your DNS policies, allow listing these domains. Okay. Now, if you want to know the service ports, so for each of the domains, we have the service ports here as well. So it looks like it's connecting to most of the domains using port 443. However, it's connecting to dnscluster.labs.tigera.fr on port 80. And maybe you're not okay with this. Maybe you want your developers to use 443, in which case you could raise this with the developers, as well. Okay. Now let's also say that you're interested in identifying the service name to IP address translations. So let's say you want to do so for google.com. You can hover over this domain, click on the plus sign to apply the filter, and it looks like the google.com domain resolved to a few IP addresses here. Okay. Again, this comes in handy during troubleshooting scenarios, right? So if a workload is experiencing issues connecting to some of these services, in most custom environments, we see that there could be a perimeter firewall. And if you want to correlate the logs in the perimeter firewall with what the service translated to, or the IP the service translated to, it's handy to know what those IPs are, okay, and you could use that information in your troubleshooting efforts. All right. Okay, so let me remove the filter we just applied, and there you have it. All the external domains the workload from the app4 namespace is communicating with. That's it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.